Committee. Barb, if you'd please call the roll.
Representative Blackburn.
Here.
Representative Clausen. Here. Representative Clifford. Here. Representative Duncan. Here. Vice Chair Ayer.
Here.
So committee, just some housekeeping to start off with. The microphone's in front of you. If you press the person button, and it turns red, that is to speak. So unlike the other microphones in the building that are red and turn green, these turn red, and that would mean you have a hot mic. Red for hot mic, makes sense. And then there is no Zoom in capability. And so if we have people, and I believe there are 6 online to testify through Zoom, we're going to be rude to the audience and turn our heads to the 2 cameras behind us. With that committee, we do have 4 bills before us today, 98, 56, 127, and 113. How we're going to do this is have each of the 4 bill sponsors give a 2 to 5 minute overview of their legislation. And then we will hear from the Chief Executive's office, followed by any other state agencies, and then likely go through organizations and then members of the public. I'm optimistic and hopeful that when people speak, they can speak to any one of the 4 bills or the issue as a whole. And then depending on the public comment, if it goes past 2 o'clock today, we'll recess and come back after adjournment. Otherwise, if we get through public comment, we'll maybe do a straw poll or see how it shakes out and pick at least one of these bills to move forward, if not more than one, if not any. So that's kind of my plan of operations. Anyone have any questions before we get started? All right, Representative Gray is asked to be first to present House Bill 98. Then I will probably turn it over to House Bill 127 to the Speaker, and then House Bill 56, Representative Larson, and end with Representative Harshman's Bill 113. So first committee bill to be heard from is House Bill 98, Public Health Order Reforms. Please welcome Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is on. Let me know if it's not. Present to you House Bill 98. This bill is a response to what we saw about a year ago this week starting, where overnight the most powerful individual in the state of Wyoming became an unelected official, making all sorts of decisions that affected the citizenry of Wyoming. And what was not there was having a framework in statute consistent with our constitutional republic, where these decisions are interacting with the citizens of Wyoming through their elected officials, and where there's ability for Wyoming citizens to remove someone and have that voice. These are ultimately risk-based decisions about the level of risk that our society is willing to bear, and the opinions of the citizens of Wyoming matter and need to be heard. This bill has about 4 changes in it if you think about it from 30,000 feet up, and they manifest themselves in a number of places in the bill. One is limiting county and state orders without approval from the state or from the localities in question in those areas for county or board orders to 10 days, with 1 extension allowed for the state orders. Number 2 is requiring the governor to sign any state order so that those initial orders are interacting with an elected official. One thing that the media is not focused on is that currently the orders are not signed by the governor, a huge hole in our statute. 3, allowing for Senate confirmation of the state health officer. And 4, allowing a state health officer or a county health officer, a county board officer to be removed. Currently, many county health officers are on contract, but in more of the populous areas where you have these county boards, they are not directly accountable to the elected boards and cannot be removed, which is why in the more urban areas, there's been some problems created in our statute. There's a whole. I do think this is a good base bill because it does combine the different concepts that have been out there, I think, in a cohesive way. There's some placeholders here in terms of number of days and a couple different things, but I do think my goal with the bill is to place all of the concepts to bring accountability to these orders in one statute. And I think we've done that here, and ensures that these pivotal decisions are interacting with the citizens of Wyoming through elected officials, so the citizens of Wyoming have a voice. Going through the bill, Mr. Chairman, page 2, lines 4 through 6, that's where we make clear that all orders have to be signed by the governor for state orders, so there's accountability there. Lines 8 through 17, this is where the order has 10 days before it needs to be approved by the legislature. Then moving to lines 19 through 23 and page 3, lines 1 through 3. If the legislature does nothing, does not convene, it gives after 10 days the governor another 7 days for that order to continue. But then he, as part of that 7-day extension, he must call us into special session to address the order. Page 3, lines 5 through 14. Now we're dealing with local orders, county orders, or municipal orders. And here is where we have the 10-day limit on those orders unless lines 16 through 19, a county order, one issued by a county health officer or county board of health, must be ratified by a majority of county commissioners after 10 days. And then lines 21 through 22, and then page 4, lines 1 through 2. This is where any order issued by a municipal health officer or by a city board of health must be approved by a majority of the elected body of that political subdivision. Page 4, lines 4 through 7. This deals with the situation where you have a health district, where you have the melding of county and municipal boundaries. And those orders would need to be approved by both the majority of county commissioners and by the municipal elected body with oversight over that political subdivision. Lines 9 through 15. This subsection clarifies that when a public health order is subject to the limitation contained in subsections B and D of the subsection, for example, if there's a 9-day long public health order, it would not be subject to the limitations, but an 11-day long public health order would. Additionally, if a public health order is effective for a 7-day period, 1 week, and then in 2 months is effective for another 7-day period, and those two orders have the same material requirements, the second order would be subject to the limitations of subsection B and D of that section, designed so that there's no gamesmanship here. That's kind of the intent of that. Page 5, lines 2 through 8. Now we're moving to amended language. The state health officer must be confirmed by the Senate, and the governor may remove the state health officer at any time. This is another hole in our statute. It's not clear whether the governor could remove the state health officer because it's put in place by the chair of the leader of the Department of Health. And so it's kind of unclear. I mean, obviously the governor could request the head of the Department of Health or remove the Department of Health if he did not remove the state health officer, but this makes it clear that the governor may remove the state health officer. The second part of this language is under current state statute. It's not clear whether the current governor can do that. Sorry, excuse me, that's making that clear. Page 5, lines 20 to 23. This is conforming language subjecting the order authority that was added earlier to statute to the limitation language that we discussed. Same in page 6, lines 7 through 9. This is conforming language. Page 6, lines 13 through 15, conforming language. Page 6, lines 9 through 13. Now, this allows in a health district, each political subdivision could jointly act to remove a district health officer by a majority vote of each district. So that adds in the removal portion for that situation, which is currently not in state statute and has been a problem in some of the more urban areas that have those health districts. That's the bill, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the time here. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? House Bill 98, Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Gray, the language subsection E on page 5, top of the page, line 2, says that that leaves the languages that says the director shall appoint the state health officer, however, that they would be confirmed by the Senate and could potentially be removed by the governor. Are there currently any other positions in the state where the director or the head of an agency, rather than the governor, can appoint a position which then requires Senate confirmation or could be removed by the chief executive?
Representative Gray, if you know.
Mr. Chairman, can you repeat that one more time? Sorry, I was thinking a little bit about your point and then
Representative Hunt, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, okay. So the current language in statute says the director shall appoint a state health officer and blah, 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 which you leave as is. But now it's the new language says the health officer shall be confirmed by the Senate after they have been appointed by the director. So what I'm wondering is that are there other, so when in a whole bunch of cases, when the governor appoints somebody, they're confirmed by the Senate. currently, are there any positions which are appointed by the head of an agency rather than the governor that require Senate confirmation?
Mr.
Representative Gray,
Chairman,
if you know.
thank you. I'm not aware. I think you pointed out a great point. I think that should be adjusted to the governor appoints the state health officer. That would be a great, and is certainly in line with the bill. That's a great change. I'm not aware of the second question, but I think that would be irrelevant because I totally agree with your amendment to add in the governor appoints.
Yeah, and I believe, well, a couple decades ago, the liquor commissioner was Senate confirmed. But in keeping with Representative Hunt's question, I believe the issue that I can see happening is new governor, new health director. You're going to confirm that new health director. They may not pick a new state health officer, for a week or so after the legislature ends, and then you'd have that entire period until the Senate reconvenes, unless I guess otherwise you would ask whoever is going to be the director of health, who they're going to appoint and try to do that concurrently, which is also slightly odd.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. So basically under current statute, you'd be waiting a year to have that appointment, and because they're allowed to make that recess appointment in our statute when we're not in session. So you're absolutely right. I think it should be amended to the governor selecting. That's certainly the intent. Yeah, I agree totally with that amendment.
And I agree with the intent. Other questions for Representative Gray? Not seeing it this time. Thank you very much. Next up will be Representative Barlow to present House Bill 127. I don't see Representative Chairman Harshman. Representative Larson, are you planning on anywhere else you need to be, or is it okay if okay. So Representative Barlow, House Bill 127.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. So this bill takes some of the similar approach, but one thing it does not do, it bifurcates, to use a word that we hear once in a while, what a person who might be under a public health order would be, whether they're fall under this or whether it's broader actions that happen in society. If I have a communicable disease, this would not affect the order that impacts me or within a community, if that makes sense. Because in my mind, those are not political decisions, those are health decisions. That if there is a disease, if somebody is, say I am COVID positive, which I have been, and the health officer says, Representative Barlow, you're in isolation for 10 days. To me, that is not a political decision. I would caution you, as you look at some of the other bills, they tie those type of decisions in with the broader picture. So this bill, what I've tried to do, and I'm not saying it's got it perfect, but I tried to do is segregate those two things so that an individual, actual disease or exposure to real disease doesn't fall under this political system, if you will. And so I'll just quickly walk through the bill. So there's a new section. All of these bills create some new section of law and have something. Well, this one is 310, which goes under the Title 35. And probably the page 2, line 1 and 2 is the most important. And this is what you're limiting is someone's ability to movement or engage in activities. So this would be traveling, wearing a mask, et cetera, gathering size, et cetera. Has nothing to do with actual having the disease or being exposed to the disease. Like I said, I'm trying to have a segregation of those two things. We can talk about how long, 10 days is what I've put them in here for those initial ones. But everything after that has to be approved by an elected body or the governor. An elected body or the governor, whether it be a county commission, municipal governing body, or if it's a statewide order, the governor. So after that, no limitations on the time of those orders, but the first initial one, which I believe is a response to real disease, is left in the hands of the public health professionals. Subsequent to that, when it limits somebody's ability to move or activities, then that becomes a political consideration. That becomes a governance elected per individual consideration. So that's probably the fundamental. As far as the rest, Representative Gray, you know, vote of the county commissioners, vote of the municipalities, governing board of the subdivision within a health district. That's bottom of 2 onto 3. And then we get to page 3. And there is one example that I've found in state statute where the governor appoints someone who subsequently works for a director. And that's with our state Medicaid director, the administrator of Medicaid. So you've got $1 billion program. Apparently the legislature in the past has said that's a pretty important. We want the governor to make that appointment, and then that person works for the director. But the governor still would have ability to say, okay, we're having a problem. So that's what this is modeled after. It's not the identical language because the Medicaid director and those services are, I mean, they're in statute. So using the current language, the proposal I've made with this is on line 12 through 16 is the governor appoints and then they work on the behalf of the director. And then further down, you can say they work at the pleasure of the director or the governor, either one who may remove. And the important part of that is there's only one place where the governor is really the health officer is really falling under the governor's direct supervision, and that's with these health orders. The rest of their duties would fall underneath the Department of Health. And they have a variety of other duties, statutory duties under the Department of Health. It doesn't make sense that the director wouldn't be able to oversee them in those capacities. So that's why there's both in this particular section. And then the next one, you get to the bottom of page 4. This is just this is the state health officer. So the first 2 pages were, local health officers, whether it's county, municipal, or district, health districts. And then on page 4 into 5, that's if it was the governor. So clearly I want to be sure that we're bifurcating, we're segregating whether it's someone who's diseased or exposed to disease versus whether it's activities or things where we're trying to prevent the transmission of disease. And that's a fundamental difference, at least in my medical training, is 2 different things. You handle them differently. Whether it was brucellosis in the state of Wyoming in livestock or avian influenza or anything else, we would treat the diseased animals differently than we would populations that we're trying to protect. What we're doing with here is trying to figure out how to have authority over those 2 different things. I say we leave disease with the actual health professionals and we deal with prevention of transmission in a political manner. And that's why you have these authorities. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm not walking through it word for word, but fundamentally that's, I would say, what this version approach tries to accomplish. Certainly there are ideas in some of the other bills that could be brought into this and may complement it. I don't suggest there isn't, but that's the 2 fundamental things here. 1, appointment and serve at the pleasure of the governor, particularly for health orders, and 2, this segregation of disease folks versus prevention and limitation of folks' ability to move and participate in everyday activities. So that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be glad to stand for any questions.
Okay, questions for Representative Barlow? Representative McGuire.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker. The question occurs to me reading both of these bills. So the presumption seems to be that the governor is being overly cautious and appoints somebody, a health officer, who is again overly cautious. My question is, what if the pendulum swings the other way? And for example, there is a smallpox outbreak, which I believe the last time that it came through the state of Wyoming had a 70% mortality rate. And the governor does not act. And maybe the health officer is not acting, and the citizens are rising up and saying, what do we do? We have a serious problem. People are dying. Who is responsible? What happens in that situation? How do the citizens move forward with some form of protection if there is no action from the leadership of the state? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So there's kind of two interesting things. First of all, in statute, and I don't have my statute book with me, there is a requirement for anybody that knows of or a communicable disease to report that and take necessary steps to prevent its transmission. And it's any person. incumbent upon you, me, or anybody in this room. And there's a liability that's associated with that, both certainly a civil liability, and I don't recall that there's a criminal component of it too. You'll also recall that last year in our special session, we looked at immunities, and those immunities actually were to that issue exactly. If you knew of something and didn't take appropriate actions. Now, in our bill that we passed last special session, and there's two versions of it going through this process right now, we've broadened that, right, to businesses and other things. But the original intent was really for exactly that purpose. You know there's a disease, you don't report it, one, as a person, or two, you're in a position of responsibility and you don't take appropriate actions, there is a liability. Now, what is the remedy to that? I guess as an elected official, you listen to those folks. What I don't believe, I mean, to the folks, and hopefully you're listening to your healthcare professionals. The step I'm not willing to go to is, me personally, is to have a legislative body get involved in that. And you'll see other proposals that have that. And I think that is an Article 2 issue where legislative stuff stay in your track, executive branch stay in your track. So I don't have a perfect answer for that. I mean, I don't know if there is an answer for that one, but I think there is some existing statute that you could reasonably say you carry a liability if you don't make the decisions, and folks could hold you accountable to that, either publicly or maybe in the courts.
Further questions? Representative Roscoe, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Chairman and Mr. Speaker, I was just wondering if this would, if this bill, and thinking back to the last one, would accommodate the need to move rapidly to, to start these health measures, if it was even a bit different than this current pandemic. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Barrow.
Mr. Chairman, so this one is specifically allows that first 10-day or that first order to be just based on the health officers, what their training and understanding of the circumstance would be. They could move that first time immediately. I believe that's what the previous bill had as well, was the ability to move immediately, like we would have maybe seen in this COVID thing. Subsequent to that, though, as you learn information and gather information, then it becomes for the limitation of people's movements and activities, right? Not for if you're diseased. If you're diseased, to me, that's a different issue. And so there is a segregation, and maybe the words in here don't delineate it well enough, but that's what I was trying to get to, was the health officers still be responsible for me being exposed or having the disease. But the restrictions that might be put on the community around me, because I might have the disease, that would be a political consideration that governing board or governor, if it's a statewide, would have to weigh into after that first initial order. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions? Representative Hunt, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, so the new language that you're proposing on page 1 and 2 in that first subsection A, when you're talking about individual movements or the ability to engage in any activity, lines 1 and 2, so did that not speak to the power of the health officer to close or restrict business or economic activity? Are we strictly talking about effectively personal freedom of an individual right to move around and do as they please?
Representative Barlow, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think yes to both. This is not the individual that's Steve. So, and I don't have a copy of the other bills, but if you'll look at the references in other bills, they talk about 310. I mean, there's 3 or 4 references. If you go look at those references, they're talking about, as a rule, people that have the disease or have been exposed to a contagious, communicable, et cetera, disease. And so that's why I don't reference these and that. I don't reference those particular statutes, or this draft doesn't. If you want to bring them in, you certainly can. But this has to do with what you were speaking of, gathering limits, types of businesses that weren't able to operate, those type of things. Now, can the language be, massaged to make it better or more, more encompassing to fit all the potentials? Certainly. But that's what I was trying to get to, not tie in the folks like me who were clinically ill, positive test, and contagion and spreading the disease if I were out in public.
I do have one question, Representative Barlow, on that I don't think covered on page 5, section 3, that we're repealing 92103D, which is the provision that the director of health can be the state health officer, which we've certainly had for 8 years previous to our current. Any rationale?
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess that comes a little bit down to the appointment issue. So if you have one person that's appointed for 2 responsibilities, you discharge them from one, you're discharging them probably from both. And so I just felt like, let's just end that need and let's have a clear line of responsibility, one for the director and one for the state health officer in the context of public health orders. So it's unnecessary if you don't want to do it. Certainly, as you mentioned, we've had, it was Dr. Milieu, who is former representative, Dr. Milieu, who was a state health officer and the director, if my facts serve me correctly. But anyway, it wasn't meant to be, punitive. You couldn't be a really good epidemiologist and the director. You would just say, let's just get rid of that. And we know we'll have 2 people in those roles, 2 different people.
2 potentially very expensive people, but yes, Representative Ayer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Speaker, so if you actually have tested positive in our current instance for COVID, then the state or local health officer could quarantine you for longer than 10 days, for as long as it was necessary to guarantee that you did not spread the disease. Is that correct?
Representative Barlow.
Mr. Chairman, so I guess there's probably 2 parts to that question. Under current statute, yes. Under this statute, under my suggestions, yes.
For a follow-up, Representative Ayer?
And yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker. And would that ability to quarantine them under your statute apply to people who had direct exposure to you as well?
Mr. Chairman,
Barlow?
yes. I guess I have a good amount of confidence and respect for the medical professionals. They don't put anybody under quarantine they don't think is appropriate to do so. And they do it for the appropriate amount of time, if they know that. Information change, new disease, things can change. But none of those 2 scenarios, I, as someone who has a disease, or you, as someone exposed, would not be covered under this. Those were not, in my view, those are not political decisions. Those are public health decisions. Political decisions are what you do to the rest of the population when something like this is going on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Good. Representative Duncan, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think I'm completely confused now. So in comparison to the previous bill versus your bill, the health officer is deciding based on only the person or persons who have been directly exposed to any particular illness and making those decisions based on exposure and illness. And the community directly health officer will, or the, say, political subdivision, as in county commissioners, et cetera, would maybe possibly make any sort of decisions on businesses closing or anything like that. That's what you're saying in your bill, am I correct?
Representative Barlow.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. So no, partially, almost. There are 2 types of health orders that I envision in current statute. Orders that impact you or someone who's me as someone who has a disease or someone who's exposed to the disease. Those remain the same. The health officer, whether it's a state health officer or a local health officer, those are handled the same. They're based on the disease, they're based on transmission, they're based on communicability, all those type of things, the epidemiology, et cetera. It's orders that would impact the broader population, a community, a county, the whole state, that are not specific to an individual, but we're trying to reduce transmission by impacting the entire populace. That's what this bill speaks to directly. So this bill, in my mind, the way I envision it, doesn't deal with the individuals. Health officers still deal with them the same way they are. And you'll look at the other bills, there'll be 4 statutes that they tie in. 4 different statutes that they tie in. This bill does not tie those in because in my view, those are the individual disease issues. This one only speaks to the broader population type of health limitations or movement and activity limitations. Those, I believe, initially the public health officer can say, got a problem, got a diseased person, it's a problem, we're going to slow everything down, get our hands around it. They can keep that individual after their 10 days. They could keep the individual locked down, but then it's a subsequent political decision about what they do with all those folks around them who may not have had any contact with the rest of the community, if you will, or the state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Further questions? Not seen at this time. Thank you very much, Representative Barlow.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the key is those references that the other bills tie in. And I don't have them in front of me, but they tie in 4 other references. Those are the key. When you trace those down, they're about, in my mind, they're about individuals, not the broader community. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Next up committee, we're going to hear from Representative Larson on House Bill 56. Welcome, Representative Larson, to corporations.
Is it on? I think
It
it
is
is,
on.
yes. Mr. Chairman, thank you, and committee, thank you. I bring you House Bill 56. I probably brought it out pretty early in the when we were starting to propose bills, just to get something out there. I think it's got some important parts to it. It ties pretty close to Representative Gray's. I will try to explain the differences that I see, essentially. In the new statute that we're trying to bring in, Representative Gray had put in there that the governor needs to sign the order. I don't know if that's that critical, so I didn't put that in there on mine. On the next part of the statute I'm putting in, it kind of refers to a statewide order, and then in that one, if the governor, or well, if the health officer says there's a state order within 15 days, if they want to do another one, then the legislature would have to actually be involved and say yes or no. The next part on that other one is on local orders. Mine's a 15-day. I think that's okay on that one for sure, because they're closer to the one like the county health officer. They can meet a lot easier than the legislature could. On mine, concerning the legislature part, I would consider an amendment of 30 days might be okay, just to give us a little bit more time in that. So that's something I would recommend. The next part, we have statute 35-1-240. Mine, part A, double I, this one is to investigate control of an epidemic. They must follow the new statute. I think Representative Gray says the same. In A, triple I, this deals with the quarantine reasonably. Oh, on this one, it actually states the quarantine needs to reasonably believed infected. That's what I've added as an amendment. I'm going to go back to that so I can read it to you. To establish and maintain and enforce an isolation or quarantine of, and then I've added, of person reasonably believed to be or known to be infected with a contagious disease. They can't just pick everyone that's close to that. I mean, they need to have a reason to put that in there, to have you in quarantine. And then the next part considers closure of theaters, schools, and public gathering places. They must also follow the new statute. And then mine pretty much amends statute 35-4-103, pretty consistent with Representative Gray's. So they're pretty close to the same. I do want to stress that I define quarantine, and I think that's important on 35-4-115. I want to look at that. You'd think I could find it quicker than this. Yeah, on that part, that'd be on page 8 of my bill, line 4. The physical separation and confinement from non-quarantined individuals of an individual or group of individuals. Again, it has to be that they were reasonably believed to be infected. They just can't quarantine, people that they assume might be close, may have been, that type of wording. I crossed that out. And then another part where I did not have the same as Representative Gray is the Senate. I don't deal anything with how a health officer is appointed or a Senate confirmation or any of that. So I'm not sure if that's needed. I don't know. So that's my bill. It's pretty much close, pretty close to Representative Gray's, and I sure hope we bring something.
Okay, committee questions. Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, speaking to the section here on page 2, lines 1 through 11, that says that the legislature would be responsible for extending an order. And I guess I sort of asked this to anybody who might know the all rules and such. Would that, in that scenario, would we be required to call a special session, and would we be burning a day doing that?
Representative Larson, if you'd want to answer.
Mr. Chairman,
that.
thank you. I would guess we would have to be recalled unless we could use the new rules that we're going by right now, where we could do it by Zoom. I don't know how long those rules might continue, but they seem to have worked pretty well. So I guess that would be my comment.
It is interesting. It says legislative order. So with the new technology, I'm not sure we would have to, if it would be specific and you have to vote on it, but it's not a law. It would be an order issued by the majority of legislators. I don't think it would count as a day, but it is interesting how we would do it. We'd have a Zoom meeting for a couple of hours, assumedly, and agree to it. I do have a question. Representative Duncan, go ahead.
Sorry. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, this always fascinates me because this came up during interim too. I guess my question is how, with so much unknown, how would we as legislators know any more than an epidemiologist to know in terms of how are we experts in terms of extending any orders or to do anything in terms of these health orders? I guess I wouldn't know. We would know necessarily the impact, but at the same time, we're none of us are medical people. So I guess our impact of our decisions would be, I don't know where I'm going, but basically, we're none of us are medical experts ourselves. So how would we know any better than a health officer?
Representative Larson, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative Duncan. That's a good question. I'm sure everybody wonders. Obviously, I'm not a doctor, and I would guess maybe 95% of us probably aren't in our body, but we are the elected people that have to answer to our constituents. And I think that's the most important part, is if we're getting people saying, wow, should somebody else have a say in this, then they would expect us to step up to the plate. I would think during the discussion of why this is needed, we're going to get the experts to come in and tell us. And just like the commissioners, I would hope, had that when they were when the extensions at the county level were happening. They were meeting with their county health officer, probably a doctor, And he was explaining how everything goes, but I think we would have to have the experts come and tell us. And then as a group, we'd have to decide if that meets why we think it should happen.
So, follow up, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just the only issue and question I have is what if, and this is a big what if we have to have more than one extension? And here we meet, we have an extension, and then what if we have to have another one? Is there a provision in here that what if we have to meet, and then what if we have multiple ones? So what do we do?
Mr.
Representative
Chairman,
Larson.
with the bill I have, and I think with Representative Grays, I probably shouldn't speak for him. I think we would continue to meet again when that 15 days is getting close. I think that's really important to have the discussion every time. I do. So,
But you would be agreeable to 30 days, you said, perhaps.
yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, Representative McGuire, and then I'll go to Representative Clifford.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm looking through the legislative handbook right now, and I'm just going to ask the question before we close out testimony. So going back to page 2, ratification of an order by the legislature. Is there such a procedure? Do we do that in any other? I'm looking through our internal rules and I haven't found it. So I'm just asking that again, as I said, before you disappear.
Representative Larson, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I had LSO write this. I guess I didn't catch that part. I would think that hopefully I don't know who, I can ask them if they could refer me to anything that our statutes refer to, and I'm guessing you've probably already done that.
Follow up?
so-
Yeah.
Actually, I have, Mr. Chairman, I haven't, but I would ask the chairman, is that something that you?
I've never yet, but I didn't dig into it very much,
Okay.
so,
Thank you.
but we can certainly find that information out this afternoon. Representative Clifford?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Larson, so I have a question going back to your statement that if this comes to the legislative body and we're putting this particular legislation to, ratify it and decide, and we would bring the experts in, and I'm just not sure, how do we bring the experts in? Because from what I saw and heard over the past year, we had the experts brought in at the local and county levels already. They were there directing us. That's what I saw and I heard. So that's my concern. And then as a legislative body, I just need to echo the concern with, would we have the political will and capital to make a decision when there is, again, I'll echo so many unknowns in the next upcoming pandemic. I just, there's so much unknown and so much risk and possibly unintended consequences that I just don't, I'm just unsure about. Thank you.
I'm not sure if that was a rhetorical question or it was directed. If you want to answer that, you're welcome to, Representative Larson.
I'm not sure if I heard a question. So
What
I
was,
don't-
Is that
excuse me,
Representative
Chairman,
Clifford? Yeah.
wasn't there experts at the table? Medical.
Representative Larson, if you know.
Mr. Chairman, I'm guessing maybe I shouldn't say guessing, but I think at the county commissioner level and maybe at the city council level, they probably had the health director of the county there to testify. I just don't know if they had any way to overrule him or what they were saying without firing him. I think, there was they didn't have the power to say no. And so I think that's important.
Okay, so I do have a question for Representative Larson on page 2, when we talk about the legislature, if it's let's say it's a health order that's not as broad as we're all currently thinking. So it's something like polio, and we want to shut down swimming pools, public and private in the state. In your mind, the legislature would still come in, even if its businesses are all open, but public swimming pools and private establishments, no swimming allowed. Or if it was a contagious STD and we had to close down certain establishments only to prevent the spread in certain parts of the state, shall we say, would the legislature, the way your bill is currently worded, still have to come in and expressly keep those going every 15 or 30 days if it was a more specific subset of one type of building or one type of facility?
Mr. Chairman, I think I think it does. Yes.
I think it does too.
Yes.
Okay, Representative Hunt.
I think
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just quickly to that point, and I admit I'm not quite sure I'm formulating a question here, but so you're speaking, Mr. Chairman, to a disease which could potentially affect a certain subset of folks, which is probably not broadly contagious. But I guess my point is that you're talking more, I guess from what I'm thinking of, is less of a viral airborne contagion and more of a glacial creep of a disease, right? And so I guess my point is that putting the best analogy I can think of is with our weed and pest control, right? Where there have been certain counties that have been under something of a form of a state of emergency, quote unquote, for 30 years when it comes to the containment of certain pests or weeds. And so I guess what I'm, so you see what I'm saying, Representative Larson, is that there's, I support the spirit of what you're trying to do here. I'm just concerned that we're not trying to bring into the fold all of the potential, possibilities. So, and like what Mr. Chairman says, something to that effect, if you're talking about a childhood disease, I don't know, a resurgence of mumps or measles, something like that. And there's some form of a public health emergency declared, which doesn't necessarily affect the broader population. Would this apply where the legislature is coming in to decide whether or not specifically schools should be closed for a certain period of time, et cetera, et cetera? So, like I say, I'm not sure I've got a question.
Public health officer, through orders, can investigate and control causes of any epidemic and any physical disabilities resulting therefrom affecting public health. So, I mean, this might expand beyond communicable contagious diseases to any type of public health disabilities. I mean, does it go as far as saying, I don't want to make a generalization on shutting down certain places that could cause cancer or something to a population that a public health order would say, no, nobody's allowed within 30 feet of, I don't know, a greenfield site, shall we say. I guess my question is, you probably meant contagious outbreaks of disease, but the way it's structured under public health orders pursuant, and if you have any thoughts on that, certainly let me know.
Mr. Chairman, it is a concern. I think all of us were probably pushing more toward the epidemic and type of situation we're in right now.
And we will
And
have,
if there was any way to get some amendments maybe to be placed in there that would actually state that, it would be fine with me.
and we do have some people to testify on from the departments. Representative Roscoe, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Larson, I'm still concerned about the amount of time it would take to go through some of these procedures a lot faster than we would have time to set up all these 10 days meetings. And I think I just wonder.
Not. I think we could figure it out. I mean, mine is not 10 days. Mine was 15, and I would be comfortable with 30.
Representative Larson, and Representative McGuire, did Representative Harshman ask you to present his bill for him? Seeing that you might be the only other name on it there, Representative McGuire, you're welcome to, or I can take some comments from people willing to testify on all the bills and we can come back to it. Okay, so let's do that. Committee, first up, we do have the Chief Executive's Office here to testify. Mr. McKay, we're going to bring him in. And I'm probably going to go ahead and bring in the Department of Health, just so they're in the room when we're all listening. In case they're okay, to corporations, the floor is yours to talk about any or all of these bills.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Committee members, my name is Rennie McKay. I'm Governor Mark Gordon's Policy Director, and wanted to quickly speak to all of you on behalf of the Governor's Office and the Executive Branch. All of us will be here throughout it if you have any specific questions that you want to follow up on from the Executive Branch side of things. So that's Stephen Johansson is Deputy Director of the Department of Health, and Dr. Ali Harris is the State Health Officer. Just wanted to just say that the Governor's position, and really appreciate you take cogently look at where you go forward from here. The Governor's position is that when the pandemic is over, that will be the right time, and he will be doing an after action review. And additionally, the Department of Health it's their typical practice after a public health event of different sizes to do an in-depth review, as they call it, a hot wash state pandemic plan that's in place now. And that was informed not only by events on the ground here in Wyoming, but also learning from across the globe that Wyoming can benefit from. So task force that's contemplated in another bill is a great idea to be the vehicle for the state's response if the legislature wants to lead that after action review as well and look at changes. And if any of that happens, the Governor's Office stands ready to help you out at any step along the way and participate at whatever level we can to be necessary as we go forward. But believing that right now, making changes before this pandemic, and as you've brought up some great questions and sponsors have brought up, there could be some very significant, the thought that has gone into these bills, and I think that there's ideas for action review and a legislatively led after action review is the right course to consider all the potential impacts and to really do this as detailed as possible because of the gravity of changes and making sure that all those second order effects are brought into consideration. As we've talked about, the state health officer routinely uses her authority to isolate and quarantine individuals and close buildings. And those could be much different events. And those are also very significant for protecting the public's health. Think about that with tuberculosis patients and the ability to isolate those folks who are very, very contagious with that. So again, really appreciate that you're looking at these cogently and putting together a plan, and we really appreciate your time today. And so I'm here to stand for any questions that you may have, and have the folks from health as well, if there's anything you'd like to discuss with all of us before we go. But thanks for your time, Chairman.
Thank you. Let me check if there's any specific questions for the Governor's Office for Chief Executive. I'm not just here for questions, but I'll give you the floor to further take us down the path.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Stephen Johansson. I'm the Deputy Director for the Health Department. I'll simply just echo Mr. McKay's comments that he was much more eloquent than I could have been on how the department will and always does look at these things, regardless of the size of the emergency or public health event, to see what could have been improved. And we welcome engagement or through a legislative vehicle. We're certainly at the table to again, like you all, try to study what worked and what didn't work throughout the course of this pandemic. Mr. Chairman, I might, at your discretion and the committee's discretion, just offer, we do have Stephanie Pyle, our Public Health Senior Administrator, and Dr. Harris, our State Health Officer here. If you'd like some more detail or an overview of on a more, for lack of a better term, routine basis than what we've seen in really a statewide and a global pandemic over the last 12 months. Some of those issues have already been brought up, but we're more than happy to provide some additional information. And I would just close with gratitude to Stephanie, Dr. Harris, and her entire team for the past 12 months. I think Wyoming and our department is unbelievably fortunate to have both of them who are really at the top of their field and very experienced with these types of issues with infectious disease, specific to Dr. Harris' experience with global pandemics, including Zika and Ebola. We're just very fortunate to have Stephanie and Ali with our department. So I wanted to close with that, Mr. Chairman, and happy to offer Stephanie and Dr. Harris to provide that information or answer specific questions that you all may have. So thank you.
Sir, Ms. Pyle from the Department of Health. They've certainly been busy over the last year. Representative Ayer, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Harris, I know we're not completely over this pandemic. Hopefully we're on the back end of it. But from what you can tell up to this point of time, with a little bit of hindsight, would you have done anything different, either less restrictive or more restrictive up to this point?
Dr. Harris, if you could do it all again, what would we have done different?
Representative Ayer, I think, that's certainly one of the questions we're going to ask when we do our post-pandemic review. In any response, in any public health response, there are actions that could be improved upon, and there are actions that I think that we did right. It's important to remember, of course, that at the beginning of the pandemic, there's little known about, a new virus, how it spread. We don't have the tools to treat. Last spring, when we didn't have the testing capability that we needed, we didn't have the severe actions were needed at that point to protect the public health. But I do think our response has examples of how we learned more about activities that were important, but take reasonable, balanced measures to protect the public health at the same time. And I do think schools are an example of that we took what we knew about how the virus is transmitted, applied that to how we could operate schools safely, and the schools were able to do that. So certainly when as this comes to a close, and I'm certainly we will ask ourselves as we review our response.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Harris, I just wanted to thank you for all your hard work in this historical moment. Thank you.
Representative Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Dr. Harris and to Rennie, when will this be, well, and I'm being a bit rhetorical here, but when will this be quote unquote over, and when, assessing its actions?
Whoever wants that question, go ahead.
And thank you, Representative Hunt. Difficult to answer, of course, and vaccination markers that we're looking for. And so from an epidemiological standpoint, we're looking at controlled levels of transmission. And from a vaccine standpoint, we're looking at a time when every person has the opportunity to get the vaccine should they want it. And I think, at that point, when transmission levels are low, we're worried about our hospital capacity because so many people are protected through vaccine. I think that is the time when it's, time to sit down and review the response. Again, don't know the exact timeline. We certainly, at least every adult who would like a vaccine will have access to it. And so we do hope that time is approaching, although we do have a little ways to go.
Follow up, Representative Hunt, go ahead.
Follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once that panel convenes, what will that look like? The executive branch, or will there be other stakeholders and folks invited to the table?
Dr. Harris, if you know.
Mr. Chairman, certainly the Department of Health will, have stakeholders that were involved in the response with us, and there were many, state agency Senate File 30, which would expand that task force to include legislators, members of the business community, members of the medical community, and so, give a kind of comprehensive review from multiple aspects of society.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead, Rennie.
I'll just add that that's the Department of Health's normal procedures. And I think, obviously, this is so significant that the governor's office is going to do, no matter what happens, a very large review of this, because I think we also have to bring in what were the impacts, because the governor And Dr. Harris, they consult on all the orders as they've been put in place over the last year. And one of the big factors is the livelihood of people out there, those working in the state and small businesses. And so, that is going to be a factor as well. Because what was the public health impact of this? What was the mental health impact of this? And what was the economic impact of this? And so those would all be brought into any work that we do through the executive branch. So I think there may be many parts of this to review, because this has been so unusual, with last year spending $1.25 billion that had to be necessary to respond to COVID. So I think there's a lot to this. I think there'll be work to look at the vaccine rollout, because this was unprecedented in history. And I want to pass on my thanks to the Department of Health and also county officials, because Wyoming's vaccine rollout has been extraordinary. So I think we've done well, and I think that does position us to have that light.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask the question and allow you an opportunity. If you don't think it's germane, I'll withdraw the question before it's answered.
Okay.
But to our state health officer, we've had a rash of, or at least I've received a lot of emails talking about potential mandatory immunization for adults against COVID. And when I looked through the statutes, specifically Title 21, to my reading, I did not see that there was any authority where the state could mandate immunizations for an adult. But I'm just curious if that is something that's out there. Is that something that has been considered? So again, Mr. Chairman, I would invite you, if you don't find it germane, I'll withdraw the question.
Jump in on that. I'll give them like 3 seconds, and if they don't jump, then we'll just move on.
Mr. Chairman,
Dr. Hurst.
the department has not considered me.
Committee for any of the Department of Health, Representative Hunt, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Sorry to keep loading them on, but Dr. Harris, speaking specifically to House Bill 56, Representative Larson's bill, I'm sure you've been listening in to the discussion, and I brought up some of the concerns about the current language of it, as far as what is and what isn't a health emergency, and so on and so forth. And Chairman Wanitzer spoke to it as well about, if you have certainly, I guess, a communicable disease, but if it's in the form of an STD, if it's in the form of a direct contact type of disease, virus or bacteria, seems to just sort of float along in the background. Meningitis, maybe I'd throw that out there as an example. When it comes to our colleges and our dorms and such, there's always these health advisories or notifications, if you will, saying, hey, have you had your meningitis vaccine? Because this is an issue on college campuses, et cetera, et cetera. And so I guess what I'm trying to ask you is, with those slow creeping background problems that never really go away, but for which there's still a constant effort at public awareness and control, does this bill as currently written hinder potentially or cause complications for those ongoing, not specifically I would say health emergencies, but those ongoing public health issues?
Dr. Harris, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Hunt, I think that this bill doesn't have an impact on our ability to, provide health recommendations and provide health messaging in those situations that you're talking about, but would impact any orders that we would need to implement, and would certainly impact our ability to quarantine or, ask individuals who have a high risk exposure to an infectious disease to stay home and away from the public to prevent further transmission of that disease, because that bill does change the definition of quarantine to only include individuals who have the disease and are contagious. So So to give you an example that many of you likely remember, the 2014 to 2016 Ebola outbreak in West Africa, that is still the largest Ebola outbreak in history. One of our primary tools for ensuring that Ebola was not transmitted here in the United States was to interview individuals when they were returning or coming to the United States from the impacted countries, assess their potential risk of Ebola exposure, and look for high-risk exposures like caring for patients or caring for ill people without appropriate PPE. And in those scenarios, we would ask those in the United States and in Wyoming, 3 weeks is the incubation period for Ebola, because that person was at high risk for potentially developing Ebola and spreading it within the United States. And so that the inability to quarantine would remove our ability to take that action, in the case of a future Ebola outbreak or something like that. It would also, as I read the bill, impact our ability to close buildings if needed for emergency purpose, where multiple staff and visitors became ill. The illness was clearly linked to being in the building. So we closed that building so that we could investigate further and find and solve the problem. And the problem turned out to be a carbon monoxide leak. And so clearly closing the building for that circumstance was important to prevent further illness and potentially death from that highly toxic gas. So my understanding that bill would impact, orders to close buildings under those circumstances.
Okay, Representative Duncan, if you can get to a mic there. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alexis, what about the bill that Representative or Speaker Barlow, with that, with the same question that Representative Hunt had? What about the impacts on that bill in the same examples that you just gave?
Dr.
Mr.
Harris?
Chairman, Representative Duncan, House Bill 127 would not have any changes on our ability to isolate or quarantine individuals. And so there wouldn't be any changes in that scenario. I will say it is not clear to me whether the closure of individual buildings for the purpose, like I just described, like a gas leak, or for any other reason, water contamination, for example, whether that would be impacted, that's just not clear to me in the bill.
Okay. Follow-up, Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And the same question for Representative Gray's bill, please.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Representative Duncan. So we would still, in that bill, we'd still have the ability to isolate and quarantine, although those isolation and quarantine orders would need ratification by the legislature or local governing body after 10 days. And so, for example, if we were to put somebody with a high-risk Ebola exposure under quarantine, that quarantine would typically last for 3 weeks. And so, 10 days into that order, that would require ratification by the legislature. And then it would impact building closures in the same way, and that after 10 days, that would need to be ratified.
Okay. Representative McGuire, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a two-part question. Looking through, it was just pointed out to me that 35-1221 allows for judicial review of decisions. I'm curious, does that apply to 35-1240, which is, I believe, where most of these health orders have come from?
Dr. Harris, if you know.
And it may help if I ask the second part of that question.
Sure, go ahead.
And if there has anybody prevailed, because it allows for it to go to the district court and then the Supreme Court? Are you aware of any cases where somebody has questioned the decision and prevailed in court? Thank you.
Sure. Dr. Harris, if you know.
Mr. Chairman, there is a current lawsuit regarding the public health orders that has been reported over the past week or so in the media, and the outcome of that lawsuit has not been decided yet. I'm not aware of any other judicial actions.
Okay. One last call for questions. Not seeing any. Thank you all for joining us today, and Ms. Pyle, it's a pleasure to see one of my favorite constituents, even if you didn't have to be on the hot seat today. With that, we're going to have Mr. Willix from the County Commissioners Association join us. We'll let him into the room. And actually, maybe Mr. Riemann is also, you'll lead in. All right, so we'll have Mr. Riemann make some opening remarks and then turn it over to Mr. Willix in just a second. Go ahead.
Is that on? All right. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I am Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. It's a pleasure to be with you. Our board president, Mr. Jim Willix, is, as you can see on the screen, and available here as well. And it looks like the other commissioner in the room is Natalia Macker from Teton County, and she is our treasurer of our association. Mr. Chairman, if it pleases the committee at some point now or in the future, I have presented on this issue of county health officers and sort of that commissioner interplay, and I'm happy to provide that presentation to you all and what it looks like in state statute. I don't want to belabor a conversation here that's not necessary, but I do make that offer. Mr. Chairman, I wanted to just start with a conversation about the WCCA's role in responding to COVID. When this became apparent as a major issue, and we saw our counties struggling across the state, we stood up. We immediately started daily phone calls with actually Zoom calls with commissioners. And in the course of that, we also invited our congressional delegation. And I'm really pleased to say that it wasn't just staff that joined us, it was the actual member that were on those calls every day. And we started out daily. We then eventually went weekly. Then every 2 weeks, went back to weekly as things started to spin up, and have been prepared to move that in different directions. We also have had interaction with the governor's office, and the Departments of Health and Homeland Security have been there throughout, interacting with commissioners on the front lines of this issue. I bring all that forward to say, I, as our executive director and our staff, have had a front row seat to the experience that we've seen in all 23 counties. And what we've seen is that there have been 23 different experiences. Frankly, there have been 93, we have 93 commissioners across this state. There have been 93 experiences, and then of course the hundreds of staff that exist at the county level that have been involved in this, all of them on the very front lines of this pandemic, in front of their constituents at all points in time. What I've noticed is that the most important part of this equation is communication. In those communities where there has been constant communication between commissioners and their public health officer, we've seen really positive things. Even if they disagreed on the issues, there was still that dialogue and input that was provided. I've seen the worst of it where there hasn't been communication. In fact, you've seen it play out in some of the media stories and ultimately some of those county health officers where the commissioners have the power have released those individuals and now have new county health officers, or at least in one instance, have not replaced their county health officer. Mr. Chairman, my members, some of them want to see these powers, want to see these changes. Some of my members want to see other powers and other changes that these bills don't complement or contemplate. Mr. Chairman, all of them want to see some change. And that's where the difficulty comes in. And as you're struggling with these bills, and as the Senate considers a couple of them that they have on their table, it's difficult to come to consensus. It's difficult to wrangle with the very intricacies of these public health laws. And we all have different perspectives on that, on what really are a complement of imperfect bills. And that's really where my members decided the most appropriate place to come was to take a position of monitor on these bills. Not oppose them, not support them, take a monitor position and really try to understand them and dig through them. That said, my members are supportive of the approach that's presented in Senate File 30 that would allow, as it's at least proposed right now, two of my commissioners, perhaps two commissioners from different perspectives of this issue, could sit as part of a panel and really dig through everything that this issue presents. Mr. Chairman, I want to again emphasize that my commissioners are resolute in the notion that something needs to change. This issue does require that. It also requires a comprehensive review and action as part of that. Again, we've taken a monitor position on this bill and would ask for your support if you get to see it of Senate File 30 at some point in the future. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand for any questions. Again, we've got our board president here and he would be happy to take your questions as well.
Okay, let's let Mr. Willix go and then ask questions of either of you, if there are any. Mr. Willix, welcome to Corporations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity, and ditto to much of what Jeremiah said is we really were on the front lines. We stood up incident command centers, we held meetings, we informed the public, and we were criticized for doing too much, and we are criticized for doing too little. All of this while still doing the important work that county government has to do on a day-to-day basis. And I believe that's why we stand in support of that Senate File 30, the task force, because we really need a holistic view and approach to this as this has settled down more. As Jeremiah included, there are commissioners, a few commissioners that would love these bills and a few that would hate them, but we are very much strong on looking at the questions and finding reasonable answers. And communication was a key part of some of that. There's only, if any of these bills advance, and again, my urge to you is to table them. I think that's the appropriate ask of you so that they're considered in the interim with the task force, should it advance. House Bill 113, I know you didn't take up testimony yet, but does have one troubling line in it, should it get any momentum. And I'd like to point that out on page 2 and 3. It tries to bifurcate between unincorporated and incorporated parts of the county. Everybody lives in the county. And so if that bill gets any traction, we'd sure like you to take a look at making sure that county orders apply to county citizens, not unincorporated citizens only. That is again, if it gets traction, I think you should take a look at that. If not, you've heard the debate. The other 3 bills all raise sound philosophical, constitutional, and medical decisions. I have commissioners that tell me they don't want to be involved in the medical decisions, and I've got others that say we want to be at least part of it, and those really are philosophical questions that come down as well. But in short, we really support the task force and urge these bills to have consideration, but not move them forward today so that we can take a holistic view and approach to them. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you, and Jeremiah, and I'll answer any questions you may have for us.
So committee, any questions for Mr. Willix or Mr. Riemann? Representative McGuire, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this would be in reference to House Bill 113. And the long and the short of it is it asks for health orders to be signed by the governor, and then a declaration of public emergency, and after 30 days that the county or the city or municipality ratify that order. And by ratify, the way that I would read it is in Robert's rules, that would be a vote of a simple majority. So my question to you is that something that is done within the county commissioner meetings? Ratification by a simple majority, presuming that you operate by Robert's rules. Thank you.
Do you want that, Mr. Willix? Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative. I cannot think of another example where we ratify anything. We take action in a legally called public meeting. So there isn't a scenario that I can think of that parallels that. So there would have to be a little bit of clarification or interpretation for what ratify means in any of the bills. But in my mind, it requires us to call a meeting and take action. And it would be a simple majority. That's how all the other, there are no supermajority actions by commissioners that I'm aware of.
Okay, further questions for the county commissioners? Representative Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To either or, are you thinking that these three bills that we're contemplating today are basically a useless kind of bill unless we get Senate File 30 passed?
Mr. Riemann, you want that one? If he needs to restate the question better, I can have him do so. Can you rephrase that, Representative Blackburn?
Do either one of you believe that these three bills we're spinning our wheels with these three bills unless Senate File 30 gets passed? Do we need to have Senate File 30 to make these three bills good bills?
Mr. Riemann, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Blackburn, I think there are very valid pieces of the conversation that come forward in every single one of these bills. And that's part of the conversation that we need to have here. I think we're looking to Senate File 30 as the opportunity, one, to guarantee that we're going to have a seat at the table, and two, to participate alongside you in that conversation about what are the most appropriate changes. Is it a comprehensive rewrite of this whole thing, or is it more specific to elements of the statutory construct? It could be maybe both in certain instances. So we're not suggesting that you throw everything out here. It has to be part of that broader conversation.
We could say cart before the horse.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's fair.
Okay, Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think to possibly elaborate on Representative Blackburn, do you think maybe the three bills we're looking at is maybe a knee-jerk reaction prior to the broader conversation and more focused attention of Senate File 30?
Good luck, Mr. Raymond.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Duncan, I don't come at it with perhaps that much angst. I think these are important conversations to have. All of you experienced very much what many of my, or all of my commissioners, frankly, experienced on the front lines. And it's just part of the conversation that we need to have. And again, as I went through these things and trying to analyze them for my commissioners, I looked at them and said, that's a piece that seems to kind of hit at what I've heard from commissioners. That one, not so much. It's not a power that we're really looking for. This one seems to have unintended consequences. And that's where we got to the point of, we could sit here and debate every single one of these for hours with my members and elected to say, let's put our eggs into the basket of a comprehensive review alongside of you and put all of these things in that basket and go from there.
Oh, Representative Hunt.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jeremiah, you mentioned that some of your members have said that they would like to see other changes or other powers or other elements that are not in any of these bills. And maybe those various ideas are too numerous to mention here, but is there any common theme that you've heard from your commissioners that are lacking in any and all of this?
Mr. Raymond?
Yeah,
what else
sure.
would you like?
Mr. Chairman, one of the best examples comes forward in the bill that you've proposed. My members would like to be able to have a broader set of individuals that they could consider appointing to be the county health officer. It is often difficult in our rural communities to find a doctor, an MD, that can fill these positions. And frankly, it's only going to get all the more difficult in our current environment here. And this is not a high-paying job. As I think you found out in testimony the other day, it's less than $1,000 a month that these county health officers, who knew who they even were before this thing, are receiving and who's excited to put their hand up for that kind of a job. So that's one of the pressing things. You know, I would suggest we need to look at what is the power of the commissioners relative to the county health officer. And I don't know that these bills totally contemplate that. If you really go into the statutes, it depends on the community and county that you're in as it relates to that particular issue. I have counties that where commissioners have no power to hire and fire the county health officer. That's done by their board of health at the local level. So I think there are many other things that need to be evaluated as part of this.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Willicks, go ahead.
if appropriate, thank you. So Representative Hunt, one of the common themes absolutely is the communication, and that's almost impossible to legislate. You know, here in Converse County, the system worked exactly as it was designed to. We had constant communication, we had understanding, we had disagreement, and then we moved on. And many of the issues, not all, were raised out of the level of communication and consultation. That's probably the most common theme is, did something happen that we weren't aware of? And I suspect the legislature has had some of that same concerns, and how you do that statewide is a little bit different than how you can do it in a community. But that's why, again, coming back to the task force idea, we can look at this in a holistic manual. And every one of these bills has, as Jeremiah said, has a little bit that we kind of would like and kind of not. But I do think communication is the one common theme I heard, but I'm not sure we can legislate that solution without some really deep concentration on how we do it the best way without slowing the response that has to happen in a very timely manner and not trying to make commissioners healthcare experts overnight.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilkes. Seeing no further testimony from the county commissioners, thank you very much, Mr. Riemann. I believe Ms. Bush, how many people are still here to testify on any of the bills? Maybe two. Can I give you each a minute or two? Marguerite, you want to come on down? Thank you very much, Mr. Willicks. I'm going to turn off your screen for you. Or actually, you can stay in the room if you turn off your screen. Ms. Herman, welcome to Corp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman Committee. Marguerite Herman, and I'm here as a trustee for Laramie County School District Number 1. I see a parent of one of our children, students here on the committee. I'll just speak that we've been able to stay open since beginning September 1st, all 5 days a week, face-to-face. And I think it's because we relied on the health orders from our city county health office and from the state that we were able to secure the confidence of parents and teachers. And teachers were rightly very frightened about coming to school. And we assured them, no, we've got the latest science expressed in these orders. We will follow them, the orders to a T. We will not have lapses. And we've been able to do that. The masking, the distancing, the cleaning, and then the numbers of people who gather for events. And those things have changed over time. They've changed with the science. And so I'm asking you here today to please insulate these orders. I'm not going to address the specific bills, but please in general, insulate these orders from politics and from popular yet unproven information. In other testimony this session, I've heard information about hydrochloroquine for treatment and that children don't get sick and a number of things that maybe people thought at one time we know now is not true. And we put our faith in the unvarnished, uninfluenced, scientific, evidence-based orders, directives from our city county health and our state health officer, and they have done us well. And I think, and it's changed over time with what we know about the transmission of the disease. What we have is a wonderful lab setting. You've got the schools that observed all these protocols, and you have the community, which was spotty at best. And we have not had transmissions, and the community has. And so I think that sort of, as a professor used to tell me, the proof is in the pudding. And so that would be it. And so I just, please, if you can insulate these orders from politics, popular opinion, popular science, I would appreciate that. That's enabled us to stay open, and we want to continue to do that. It's important for our children and our families.
Okay, bold move, asking politicians not to insert politics and things. Questions from Ms. Herman? Seeing none. Thank you very much, Marguerite. Mr. Winnie? I'm going to have Ms. Bush.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. As I see it, you all are struggling with the seeming open-ended authority of the state health officer. And I got it. I'm not sure I was happy about some of the requirements I saw, but I complied with them. As I went through my training in the Navy to be a CO on a ship, one of the instructors at one point said, you know, Skipper, you can do anything you want as long as it's right. And that's the crux of what you're dealing with. Well, I think history kind of gives us a little bit of a little bit of guidance in here. You may recall the thalidomide thing of the early 60s, the drug they were giving to pregnant women, and it turned out to be a disaster in Europe. Well, there was a health officer in the then Department of Health, Education, and Welfare that wouldn't approve it for use in the US. And he took a lot of heat only to ultimately be shown correct. There was something not so good about it. So I think that authority to act of the state health officer quickly is important. But then what do you do? Where do you go from there? Is it 10 days? Is it 20 days? Whatever. I would offer you the thought, and I'm probably closest to Speaker Barlow's bill, that by about, say, the 10 or 20 day point, the governor has to either concur in, modify, or rescind whatever order, and perhaps out at the 3-month point, then the legislature would get involved and say, okay, what are we going to do? How long is it going to go? Et cetera. So you make that transition from a professional opinion to a publicly accountable, someone publicly accountable to the voters. Subject to your questions. Thank you.
Questions, Mr. Winnie? Seeing none. Ms. Bush, Medical Society, welcome to corporations.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. Sheila Bush with the Wyoming Medical Society. We're an organization that represents PAs and physicians across the state, just under 1,000 members. We stand in tentative opposition to all of the bills in front of you today, but I say that recognizing that the conversation is necessary. And we think that that conversation is best had in Senate File 30, as was testified earlier. Representative McGuire, you asked a question very early in the hearing about a physician's requirement around contagious diseases. I think it was of Representative Gray. I did want to give you that statutory reference. Wyoming Statute 33-26402A, subsection 14, does require any physician or any member licensed under the Board of Medicine. It says failing or refusing to properly guard against the spread of contagious, infectious, or communicable diseases is punishable by failure to relicense, renew a license, and they can also have their license taken. So that does globally apply to anyone licensed by the Board of Medicine. And I don't know if that fully addresses your question, but I did want to offer that. I did send you a graph earlier this morning. I don't know that we have time to go into it. Many of you may have seen it in the interim. It's the same graph, but just very briefly, that graph does go into part of our concern about politicizing some of these public health decisions. You'll see on the graph, if you have it in front of you, it's just a timeline of coronavirus and transmission in the state of Wyoming. It's of last year in March. And you'll see on March 15th is when we closed schools. March 22nd is when we closed bars, gyms, large gatherings. And so you'll see the trend of transmission climbs pretty staggeringly. It goes kind of like this until April 5th. April 5th is exactly 15 days from that time. Our concern is the graph will show you that everything starts to flatten exactly as epidemiology and public health science told us it would. And if we were to have taken any of these bills right now with specific day orders and have those in place last March, you could imagine us having the same conversation and someone holding up a graph and saying, see, it doesn't work. See these numbers, they just continue to do this. And so we could imagine ourselves not continuing any of the mandates, not continuing any of the closures, and never having the opportunity to see that flattening that's very evident in the chart I shared with you. And so I guess I would encourage you just to look at that and be very thoughtful as we talk about all of these. We recognize the conversation needs to be had. We very much want to be part of that. We think medicine can offer a resource inside of that. We do think these are a little early, and that the full review and the robust work that will come is a better answer. With that, I would close.
Questions from the Medical Society? Seeing none. Thank you, Sheila. All right, I don't believe I have anyone else online. So we are going to close public comment. Committee, you have 4 bills in front of you. So I know Representative McGuire would be happy to explain from Speaker Harshman's. You have a couple of options. I guess I could do a straw poll, or we can just, if somebody wants to move one of the 4, the vehicle to start with, we can certainly do that and amend into it. If I don't get a motion and a second on any of them, then I guess you can motion to table them all. I'm pretty flexible to whatever the committee's pleasure. Representative Blackburn. I would take one at a time. If you want to move more than one, we can certainly move multiple bills. That's not my prerogative, Representative Blackburn. Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman, I think we should, just for conversation's sake, at very least move one bill. And I think the bill that doesn't have the problem with not allowing people that have a disease to be quarantined, I think that 98 would probably be the vehicle that I would start with. At least needs the least amount of amending. The others I see merit in, but I think there would be heavy amendments.
You're picking House Bill 98?
Oh, no.
Sorry, I heard what you said, but it sounded more like Barlow's
127.
127.
I would restate my motion to move 127 forward.
Blackburn's happy to second anything, apparently. Okay, so the motion is for 127 to take it, and we have a second. So that, I guess we're gonna apparently meet upon adjournment this evening to discuss 127. Is there another bill you want to move forward as well? Or we can take what's in these 3 and amend them in certainly to 127. Or if we don't do that, we can move another one at the appropriate time. So how about for now, if you would spend the afternoon focusing on 127 and just chairman's prerogative, look at the other 3, see if there's one you like better than 127, or see if there are portions of one of the other 3 to amend into 127. And then we'll just kind of take it how it goes after adjournment tonight and see how it works. Representative Hunt.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have 127 in front of us. So yes, we are coming back in the evening to consider the other bills, or no?
I think so. I mean, they're all going to be on the table still until we remove them. If you want to make a motion now to remove all 3 and table the other 3, we certainly can, but I think
I guess not at the moment, Mr. Chairman.
At this point, we're coming back after adjournment tonight for a while. We'll start with 127, see what we can do to it.
But we are coming back after adjournment in more or less any case.
I don't think we're going to get there in 3 minutes unless you all tell me that nobody wants to amend it and just put it forward.
Shut it up.
I mean, now that 120 is up on the table, I'll ask for any amendments on it. Or if anybody tells me they want more time, I know where a couple of you stand. I don't know where a couple others of you stand. So I am happy to come back upon adjournment tonight for a while and work 127. But if nobody wants any amendments into 127 and put this forward as a vehicle and amend it on the floor, we certainly could.
Mr. Chairman, I have no problem with 127. I mean, I don't want to speak for anybody else, but I certainly don't.
Any amendments or discussion on 127? Let me ask. Seeing no discussion or amendments into 127 at all. We'll start there, Barb, if you'd call the roll on 127.
Representative Blackburn. Representative Clausen. Representative Clifford. Representative Duncan. Aye. Vice Chairman Ayer.
Aye.
Representative Hunt. Aye. Representative Roscoe.
Aye.
Chairman Swanton.
Aye. I think that's a 9-0. So committee, let me ask one more time, if there is another one of these 3 bills you would like to push forward now, we certainly can and discuss, or we can, if you don't want to meet tonight is what I kind of get the sense I'm hearing. They're certainly going to remain in the committee and we can move them at any time.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Representative Hunt, yeah.
No, I'm not, I mean, for speaking for myself, I'm not saying that I it's inconvenient to meet this evening. I'm just now wondering if we are still planning to meet this evening. Could you consider the rest of the legislation?
Well, let me ask if there's another one of these three bills left remaining that you would like to move.
3 bills?
There are
120?
three bills, 98, 113, and 56. We did not get a holistic overview of 113. But if you want to move that forward, I will certainly invite Chairman Harshman to come talk to us this evening. Representative Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I personally,
I like this
because
one.
we're in discussion. Personally, I don't see the need for the others because the one we just moved is basically, they're all basically the same. There's just small nuances between them. And so I don't see the need to move the other ones. That's just a personal decision on my part. So that's
Okay.
just where I'm at.
Representative Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with that being said from Representative Duncan, should we, and this is a question to you, should we look at the other bills and then try to glean from them to make one?
What we've done, committee, is moved 127 forward without amendments. And so certainly the sponsors or co-sponsors of the other three bills can issue amendments to that bill on the floor at the appropriate time, taking anything they want in the three bills before us. This committee can move another one of these three bills if we'd like to do that as well. If you want to do that now, otherwise they just stay with the committee. And so we can meet on Monday and talk again or Wednesday if you feel so at that time.
Or we can table the other bills.
Or you can make a motion to table them if you'd like to do so. It's really the same thing. If they're not moved on, they just hang out with the committee for the next week. And we could even, if 127 has problems on the floor, we can always pull another one out at any given time.
So if
Reverend
I,
Blackburn.
if I make the motion to table it indefinitely,
You certainly could. And as soon as you do that, it's not debatable. Are you going to move that? Or do you want to just have them held in the committee and we can pull one out should we need? As your chairman, I'd say that's probably a better avenue just in case the Senate file gets hung up, 127 gets hung up. So if that's fair, committee, right now, we'll just leave them in the possession of the committee. And should we want to hear them next week or Wednesday or Friday, we can pull them out. Just let me know. I can put one on the agenda. Got it. So then I'm not sensing there's any need to meet after adjournment tonight, so we can do budget all night. I like it since I'm in committee of the whole chair here in 3 minutes.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Hunt.
I would, I guess if we don't meet tonight, okay, fine. But I do think that it is, it should be the responsibility of this committee to consider the rest of the legislation because this is, obviously all these bills are not going to move forward, but nor do they necessarily, it doesn't make sense. But this issue that these apply to have been an overarching part of our lives for the past year. And I think that it is our due diligence as legislators and to the respect, being respectful to our colleagues who have taken the time to bring the legislation forward, that we address them at some point. And at that point, we can vote them up, we can vote them down, doesn't matter. But I think that there are, the issue before us is so broad that it would not hurt to have a couple of contingencies out there to foster the discussion. So thank you.
I completely agree. And Senate File 30 as well as moving into, and we could always do, I haven't read it closely, but I would imagine some things like a state appointed health officer as well could be amended into that. Representative Blackburn?
I think that's what we're doing by tabling that, aren't we? We're leaving them out there to discuss. We're not.
If you don't table
not
them and you
shirking
just
our
don't
duties.
move them, they're still here. If you table them, they're toast pretty much.
Okay, so they're still here.
Yeah. So
We're not sure.
So for that, unless I'm hearing any movement, we want to meet after adjournment. All right. Otherwise, we will adjourn today and we will discuss Wednesday. I believe Representative Blackburn has a bill, Representative Provenza. And if anybody wants me to put one of these on the agenda Wednesday, please come see me and we'll talk. With that, we're adjourned.